Chapter 4. I heard sick groans from the kids behind me, but when I turned back, they all had their heads down, pretending not to be watching. Yuck. My arm tingled. It felt sticky and wet. Mrs. Mark let go of me. She grinned. Thick gobs of saliva clung to her teeth. Tasty. I think that's what she said. My mouth dropped open in shock. I couldn't believe it. Did she just lick me? I just stood there, staring at her. She was so totally weird looking. She had the biggest head I've ever seen on a human. She had thick brown hair piled on top of it, with a pencil stuck through the top. She stared back at me with wet brown eyes. Cow eyes. She had pale yellow skin, like the skin of chickens in the supermarket. Her cheeks were so flabby they bounced on her neck as she grinned. Her whole face sagged over her shoulders like raw cookie dough. "You may take a seat, Paul," she said finally, in that rattly voice. She pointed. "Take that seat near the back." I was so glad to get away from her. I turned and walked as fast as I could toward the back. "Did you see that? She licked me," I whispered to Celeste as I passed by her seat. She stared straight ahead and pretended not to hear me. Her hands gripped the desktop so tightly her knuckles were white. "It's play a joke on the new kid," I told myself. "In a short while, we'll all have a big laugh over this." But none of the kids were even smiling. As I stepped into the back row, I noticed a line of wire cages on a table against the wall. Inside the cages, I saw a white bunny, some kind of tiny gray squirrel, a guinea pig, and a white mouse. Aren't we a little old for classroom animals? I asked myself. I carefully stepped over a red-haired girl's feet and squeezed in front of a solemn-looking boy who didn't look up from his textbook. I slid into the empty seat, dropping my back beside me. The wooden desk was scratched and cracked. In one corner, someone had carved 2 words deep into the word, "Help me." I rubbed my finger over the words and glanced to the front of the room. To my surprise, Mrs. Mark remained in the doorway. She hadn't moved. Is she too big to get through a door? I wondered. "We'll start with our grammar homework today," she announced. "Paul, I'm sure someone in the class would be happy to help you catch up." With a grunt, she squeezed her body through the doorway. The red dress bounced up and down as she moved. Sound comics on TV always joke about a woman's dress being as big as a tent, but this dress really did look like a shiny red tent. Her chins bobbed, her tall hair bounced and shook, and as Mrs. Mark walked to her desk, I heard a wet smacking sound. Smack, smack. Leaning across my desk, I lowered my eyes to the sound and gasped. Mrs. Mark was barefoot. Her feet were huge, as big and puffy as pillows. They made disgusting wet smacking sounds against the whole wooden floor. "Oh," I let out a low moan, watching those weird bare feet. No toes. No toes. Instead, thick, shiny black claws curled out from the tops. I felt sick. A wave of nausea rolled up from my stomach, and then the teacher's rattly growl broke through the silence. "What are you looking at, Paul? You got a problem?"